And the trend through the 19th and into the 20th century was to continue the process of specifying and enforcing gender markers in job-related language. As a result, our culture inherited such paired terms as host and hostess, waiter, waitress, steward, stewardess, actor, and actress. The idea was to create female-marked terms for words which had traditionally identified only males. This trend continued relatively unquestioned until the surge of feminist-based inquiry asked why females, who did the same work as males, had to have different titles. It was also noted that for each term of a pair, a different value judgment was being made. For example, to be a waiter was to have more prestige than to be a waitress. Why? Because waiter, the original word, the root word, reflected the implied male hegemony. And then there were other words which simply had no female-based tags, words such as man, mankind, congressman, and chairman. It became obvious that social and political power were associated with the use of these terms, and that women were being excluded and marginalized through the language. However, even today, when these terms are questioned, a common response is, "Oh, get over it." Everybody knows that man and mankind are generic terms. They always include women. It's important.
Does any of this really matter anyway? Who cares if we all say man and mankind? We all know that we mean everybody, don't we? Don't we? Don't we?
Well, words have more than one meaning. Language and culture are very connected. Words have, of course, their denotative meaning, which is the actual meaning of the word, what comes to mind visually when we first hear the word, the dictionary definition. Then words also have their connotative meaning, which includes the experience and understanding of the listener.
Well, can't we just decide to change all these meanings?
It isn't that easy. For example, a teacher in our writing program recently did an interesting activity with her students to get them to see this difference. She had them list the 10 most important men in their lives. They were sitting there writing down their coach's name or their father or Jesus or whomever. She listed these names on one side of the chalkboard. Then on the other side of the chalkboard, she wrote the sentence, "All men are created equal," and said, "Let's talk about this meaning of men." The students agreed that in this sentence, the meaning for men included women too. Then the teacher asked the question, "Well, I asked you to list 10 men. How many of you listed a woman?" Well, of course, no one had. It was a good way of leading students into a discussion of all the layers of meaning in a word.
So where do these layers of meaning come from?
It's historical. The very early people who were actually writing and maintaining records were men. Most of the English language was developed and defined by men. It was inequality, clearly a male point of view. Language functioned in a way that kept men in power in many respects.
Are you saying that this inequality is carried over into the language?
Yes, and in more recent times, the language has grown to include diminutive words for women's careers, words such as stewardess and waitress. A diminutive implies something lesser than the root word that it came from. And the root word is the masculine, the diminutive is like an appendage.
This mean we think of women as lesser?
Well, perhaps. Just listen to the language in that jump rope rhyme.
So you're saying that because this rhyme has a narrow view of women, that they'll grow up to be biased against women?
Well, not because of one rhyme, but when children are very young, they're learning that this is how culture is, this is how life is, this is just the way the situation really is. That's when it really does become ingrained and carries over. Children parrot what they hear. Children do, even at a very young age, learn gender bias through language.
What exactly do you mean by gender bias?
Gender bias is used in a lot of ways. I see it as including a reference to gender when really none is needed, as in the waiter-waitress example. There is no need to establish whether the person is a man or a woman. Just server is fine.
So that we don't carry on the biased attitudes of an earlier age.
Absolutely. Language can be a weapon, and it can also be used for healing. I think that it can be used either way. And I think traditionally, in a lot of ways, it was used negatively. But I think we can overcome some of the problems and create more equality by consciously changing the way we use language.
Stand by.
Scene 4, take 2.
Action.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
Hey, something's wrong.
What's wrong?
The terms man and wife are unequal.
What do you mean?
Wife denotes a relationship. Man doesn't.
Cut. Let's try it again. Stand by, everybody.
Scene 4, take 5.
Action.
I now pronounce you man and woman?
Well, we might as well not get married at all. You haven't said anything about us getting married.
It's true. You've just declared us to be what we already know we are, a man and a woman.
So what should I call you? Man and wife. That's the only thing I can think of.
That's because man and wife is what we've been trained to hear and say. Now, let's break for lunch and we'll deal with this later.
Will you look at this? Check out this brochure that came from our alma mater today.
What is it?
They want me to join a Letterman's Club and buy a watch made especially for the club.
So what's wrong with that?
Well, for starters, this letter's addressed to fellow Letterman. And to top it off, the watch is engraved with the word Letterman.
I guess I don't see the problem. After all, you did play basketball for them.
The problem is I'm not a man.
No kidding.
Well, how would you like it if they asked you to join a Letterwoman's Club?
Oh, come on. These clubs have traditionally been called Letterman's Clubs. And now with women into so many sports, they can join the Letterman's Clubs too.
Tradition is not a good reason to perpetuate biased language. I'm not a man, and no amount of tradition will make me one.
Well, what would you name it?
Well, we all are letter winners. They could call it the Letter Winners Club. Or how about the Varsity Club?
That would be good, and all varsity athletes, men and women, would be called letter winners and belong to the varsity club.
Yeah, thanks for understanding.
So are you going to order the watch?
I will, when they come out with the Letter Winners watch.
I'm sorry, but letter winner just doesn't sound right. I have to admit, I like letter man, and I still like man and wife.
Well, do you know why you prefer these usages?
Well, isn't it more natural to say letterman and to say man and wife?
No. Letterman and other such terms are developed by our culture at a particular point in time.
Well, then why does it sound so natural?
Because of habit, because we say it over and over and over again, and that's quite different than being natural.
Then what is natural?
Natural is to me something that comes from a higher spirit or a higher force. Now, our words do not. Our words are in fact defined and developed by our culture, and they become familiar or habit-forming to us.
Oh, and you want me to break some language habits, eh?
Yes, but I can't force you to do that.
Oh, I won't be forced. I am not comfortable with letter winner.
I know that, and I'm not going to condemn you for protecting that which feels familiar to you. But I want you to be more sensitive to the reality that exists now.
Well, I try to be sensitive to others.
Work to be sensitive to the language.
How? What do I do?
Give yourself permission to go through your uncomfortable feelings, to practice the new language until you can internalize it and make it your own.
Like saying letter winner again and again? It just seems so artificial.
Yes, but as you practice it, it will become a part of you. Then you can get involved in more experiences where you encounter language with which you are uncomfortable. You might even use language which makes others uncomfortable.
Well, like what?
Well, you might use the word she whenever you normally use the word he.
Oh, come on. That's so trivial.
Well, if it's so trivial, then you wouldn't mind using she all of the time.
She instead of he. I guess it isn't so trivial after all.
Nice meeting you. Rosalind, I'd like you to meet Bill Bender. Bill, Rosalind Fenimore.
What's a woman doing in this position?
So you're the new postmistress.
At least she's attractive.
Yes, but we don't use the term postmistress anymore. My title is postmaster.
Uh-oh. One of those feminists. Oh, don't you like being a woman? Don't you like the special power women enjoy? She doesn't know when she's got it good. What's her problem?
Well, first of all, being a woman doesn't have anything to do with my job, so I don't like having those issues mixed. And this power idea, I don't think I like the type of power the word mistress implies.
Good grief. Oh, isn't power, well, just power?
Actually, no. There's a big difference between being the mistress of the post office and the master of the post office. What does it take to get a little respect around here?
I really don't understand why it matters. Master, mistress, it really is the same, isn't it? Any fool knows they're the same.
No, I don't think so. It's the master who controls, gets the respect. And it's the mistress who serves. I want the respect.
I guess I can see your point. If you do a postmaster's job, you should have a postmaster's title. Another whining female. You just have to tell them what they want to hear.
It's amazing how people say one thing and think another.
Yes, unfortunately, some people just use the language to be politically correct.
Now, politically correct, what do you mean by that?
Well, as I see it, it means that some people say that people should be treated equally, but believe something completely different.
What do you do about people who say one thing and think another?
It certainly depends on the person. If it's a person that I think is open to discussing bias, I might say to that person, what are you really thinking?
Well, that makes sense.
But sometimes it's hard with the political correct movement to see what someone's attitude really is. I find political correctness very dangerous because people are such good foolers.
Yeah, it's like the guy in the last scene. It's too bad we can't see what people are really thinking.
Yes, but the ambiguity will always be there.
You know, I'm wondering about that sign. It used to say, "Flag man ahead." Do you think it's a sign for the sake of political correctness, or is it sincere?
I don't know. I can infer that an employer was aware of gender bias and wanted to create a sign that was more equitable and would promote respect for the different people in the company. But it could also be the case of someone who uses correct language but still denies equality.
It seems the key to language change is attitude. What we need is an attitude shift, right?
Language and attitude certainly are intertwined, and I think that for some people, if there's an attitude shift, there will be a change in language. But this raises the question, can a positive attitude alone change the language?
What do you mean?
I think they're too intertwined to separate. How are you going to learn a different attitude unless you are learning a different usage of language at the same time?
At the same time? Well, this is confusing. I need to know which to focus on, a new attitude or the words themselves.
Well, one thing I can say is the confusion you are experiencing can be very motivating.
How's that?
Let me explain. When we feel like we're confused, we're most motivated. We can use frustration or confusion or what we might call incoherence to think differently about something.
I can't deny I'm thinking differently about how to deal with my gender-biased language. This is all very confusing, very ambiguous.
True. Obviously, ambiguity is involved, but perhaps it's necessary to learn something new.
Well, I must be learning, because language is really starting to look different to me now.
I really liked it. Well, it irritated me. Why? Was it too weird for you the way they jumped back and forth between the Victorian period and the 1950s?
No, that was cool. It was the stuff they did with the lead actor.
Emma?
Yeah, they kept changing Emma's part. Why'd they do that? Every few minutes, she was a completely different woman.
Well, it might have been pretty subtle, but that was the point of the whole film. Didn't you notice they were calling her something different every time she turned into someone else?
What do you mean? They just called her a woman, didn't they?
No, only once. They called her everything but a woman, like when that old man called her Miss.
So why did Emma change?
Because the term Miss changed the way the other people viewed her.
Oh, so when somebody said, "Let the girl go,"
she actually became a girl. Didn't you get the feeling she was being forced into the role?
Yeah, and then when that bodiless voice shouted about her being stupid.
I think the voice said broad. No, dame.
And then she served tea like a lady.
In that silly hat.
But the worst was when the hero, what's his name, said some chick.
Yeah, that's when I really got frustrated.
But it didn't bother me when he called her old girl.
Only because he was taking her seriously at that point.
Ah, of course. That was the same scene when he called her a woman.
Getting rid of the hat, that was a big improvement.
I'd say calling her a woman, that was the real improvement.
Talk about strange, the way that one woman kept becoming all the parts she was talking about.
I thought it was wonderful.
It was almost as if she was saying, look, the words make the woman.
Well, you know, the words aren't directly responsible, but they are important.
Well, yeah, language and behavior are interconnected. They reinforce each other. But I didn't know that lady is a pejorative term.
Actually, lady has class implications. Lady implies gentility, you know, as in she's a real lady. Lady implies refinement. Lady implies a certain effacement.
Effacement, as in becoming invisible?
As in suppressing, perhaps even erasing her body. We would never think of a lady as having bodily functions, for example. A lady doesn't do that.
Right, just like a lady never sweats.
She doesn't even perspire. Perhaps she glows. These are connotations of the word lady.
Well, this effacement seems pretty ridiculous, but it isn't a big problem, is it?
Well, yes, it is, because lady effaces the body, so it also effaces work. Ladies don't work. They are restricted to certain realms.
To their houses and to social events.
Yeah, and certainly no one would want to accuse a lady of anything intellectual because the word lady implies a certain superficiality.
So the term carries with it implied restrictions. And the same would be true of other terms for women. Miss, broad.
Chick, dame. These words imply certain ways of behaving, of being treated. And they're often associated with women of various social classes.
And what about woman? What is implied in that term?
Woman is a much broader term. Although there's no such thing as a classless term, woman doesn't obviously have class connotations immediately apparent. Woman is also a term that doesn't erase or suppress the body.
So a woman can work?
Yes, she can. But then there's the problem of how she's addressed in the workplace.
Oh, this one I know. Like when someone says, I'll have my girl call your girl.
That's right. And it is not okay to call a woman a girl.
But you know, this problem of language change in the workforce can be very difficult.
Yes, it can.
I think we should modify the contract before we get bids.
What did you say, John?
I said we need to act on this immediately.
John, if we do, we're taking a big chance.
Let's get on with this. We're in agreement, aren't we?
No, at least hear me out.
Let Mrs. Donovan talk.
I don't mean to be rude, but I prefer to be addressed as Ms. Donovan in the workplace.
But why? Isn't Mrs. respectful? You can't mean to tell me that my mother was wrong by wanting to be called Mrs. Bonaccio by her friends.
Well, we're not exactly in your old neighborhood, are we?
That's just the point. Mrs. or even Miss might be respectful outside of the office in a social setting, but those words indicate marital status, and whether or not Claire, Ms. Donovan, is married isn't important at work.
Frankly, I'd say Ms. is best precisely because people make an issue of a woman's marital status in the workplace. We've got to agree here and now that whether a woman is married is no more important than whether a man is married.
Agreed. Agreed. But just out of curiosity, what do you prefer to be called outside of work?
Outside of work, I'm fine with either Ms. or Mrs.
And I prefer to be called Ms. at the office and all social settings. Except when they call me by my first name, Meredith.
This is so irregular. I think we should...
While we're on this subject, I have a complaint about another form of address that we use. Did you know that it's still company policy to begin letters with Dear Sir?
It might be company policy, but I use a more general salutation.
Oh, and what is that?
I address a person by his or her title. If I were going to write you a letter, for example, I'd address it Dear Chair.
Why not Dear Chairman?
Because there's no need for a masculine suffix. You are the chair, regardless of your biological sex.
Right. You happen to be a man, but your office could also be held by a woman.
I agree with Sue that when we're at work, we should address people by their job titles and not their genders. And that goes for names on doors, on letters, and company directories.
Now, can we get back to the contract?
Ms. in the workplace. Of course, what other term would work so well? Hi, Marshall.
Hi, Scott.
How you doing?
Okay, how are you?
Good. How's your family?
Okay, and yours?
Good, good. Just picking up a few things for the holiday.
Me too.
You know, I was just thinking about that video we're working on.
Yeah, how so?
Well, I saw one of the scenes. The meeting scene?
Yeah, and what do you think about it?
Well, it makes perfect sense to me to use Ms. in the workplace. But outside of work, well, what do you think?
I think it's important to establish some uniform honorific titles in the workplace. But for other kinds of situations, when a woman says what she wants to be called, then I respect her wishes.
So you make a judgment situation by situation?
Yes, I think that's the only way to approach it.
Well, but how do you feel about having to change how you address someone? I find it difficult.
It is difficult to make such changes, but we have to be concerned about the stereotypes that are being fostered when we don't change our language.
True, true. You know, speaking of stereotypes, I noticed that the power figure in the scene were all white males. The chair, the one guy saying, let's get on with the meeting, and the other men tending to talk only to each other and to the chair.
What you were seeing was the depiction of what some have described as hegemonic practices.
Hegemonic?
Yes, hegemonic as in hegemony. Let's see. Hegemonic power is seen in a situation where a high-power group determines what a low-power group can be called.
So hegemony is when a powerful group of people try to control everyone else in society?
Well, it's not just people in power using that power absolutely to dominate others.
Well, then what is it?
To be precise, hegemony is the situation where one group of people is held up as the measure of right behavior, correct thought, and proper attitudes.
Oh, so all the people of a society can be socialized to believe one group is better?
Yes, and people can be socialized in a negative way to believe certain stereotypes.
Then a woman could believe negative things about herself and other women. Hegemony could influence her socially, even psychologically.
Yes, hegemony conveys negative images and stereotypes about a particular group, which may be adopted by members of that group even when belief in such stereotypes is not in their best interest.
So what's to be done?
Well, what I think is that there should be education toward equity, opportunity, and diversity.
And would I have a place in this educational process?
Of course.
So how would someone like me fit in?
By doing precisely what you're doing now. We all need to educate ourselves to honor people's right to choose those names that identify them positively, particularly if they are part of low-power groups in the society.
Would it be helpful if someone outside of our hegemonic society could help us to see our language problems?
I can answer any of the questions about the two genders on this planet.
Do they both like this thing you just described?
It's called ice cream, and yes, they do.
What are the actual names given to these two groups?
Male and female, or man and woman.
Male, female, man, woman, and the name for the two groups together?
Man or mankind.
But that is not logical.
It isn't.
Only the man is represented. How do you include the woman?
You're right. We could use people or humans.
Maybe. Or what is that word? Humankind?
That sounds odd.
Like an alien word? It would appear you need practice with your own language. Now, repeat after me. Humans, humankind, people.
Humans, humankind, people.
I have to admit, I always use man or mankind, even if it isn't logical, even if it isn't natural.
Well, why? Why not change?
I keep thinking that changing generic terms is like making a mountain out of a molehill.
Well, let's try something. Why not sort of flip the sexes around, you know, exchange the genders?
What do you mean?
Well, instead of using man...
Say woman?
Yeah. Now, does that feel as comfortable to you?
Woman. A woman doesn't feel comfortable at all. I get the image of a woman in my head. Only a woman. Woman is just too specific a term.
Well, so is man.
I wonder if I see only men when I say mankind.
You know, you remind me of when I was an English major. I was taught to read like a man, with a male perspective.
You mean the generic way of reading was to read like a man?
Yes, but it seemed like a normal thing to do. It was only when it was pointed out to me that there was no such thing as reading generically that I could see the gap in my reality.
Well, that's what it's like, a gap. A gaping hole in the word mankind. It's like there's a place where women should be but aren't.
You know, when you see a gap in the fabric of reality, when you see the zipper in Godzilla's costume, so to speak, you say, wait a minute.
Yes, wait a minute. We've got to make some changes.
Really, because once you see that the generic isn't really generic, well, then you see it everywhere. But before you discover that, you never see it.
Now here's how you say it when the game is actually going. The Falcons are in a tight player-to-player defense. The ball comes back out on top to the swing player. There's a pass to the low post.
What did you just say?
A pass to the low post.
No, the player-to-player and swing player stuff. Why don't you just say man-to-man and swing man?
Well, it's not just men on the court anymore, and it's rude to female players to call them men.
But the man terms are more natural.
Only because that's what other sportscasters keep saying.
Okay, I get it.
Are you sure? Go ahead and give it a try the neutral way and see how it feels.
There's a score, 2 points. Now the Lady Falcons inbound.
Lady Falcons? No, they're just the Falcons, period.
Oh, I get it. The Falcons set their player-to-player defense.
Well, you're going to need a little more practice.
Yeah, those new words are tough.
Well, I know. I had to learn it too.
You know, what it really takes is an attitude change.
Right, exactly. Now let's practice some more.
There's a score, 2 points. The Falcons inbound.
Nice meeting you.
Rosalind, I'd like you to meet Bill Bender. Bill, Rosalind Fenimore.
What's a woman doing in this position?
So you're the new postmistress.
At least she's attractive.
Yes, but we don't use the term postmistress anymore. My title is postmaster.
Uh-oh. One of those feminists. Oh, don't you like being a woman? Don't you like the special power women enjoy? She doesn't know when she's got it good. What's her problem?
What do you mean, her problem? Isn't it our problem?
Huh?
Well, wasn't that what you were thinking? That it is just my problem?
How did you know I was thinking that?
And we're not going to get anywhere if you continue to think like that.
Like what?
You know that my ideas can be dismissed because you label me a feminist. Why can't you see beyond labels?
How do you know what I'm thinking?
Because I can read your mind.
Actually, I think it's because you've seen people behave like him so many times before. Isn't that true?
Yeah, on one hand, I'm disgusted. I hate how he just treated me. But on the other hand, look at the culture he's caught up in. It's not just men who act like that.
What do you mean?
Everyone patronizes women at one time or another. We all have to learn to think well of women and speak accordingly. But I'm not sure this particular person is ever going to change. Why should I try to understand him if he isn't willing to see my point of view?
Wait a minute. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't you just rationalizing your own bad attitude?
Okay, you're right. You're right. If I don't let people know how I feel, how can I expect things to change?
So, tell Bill what you want to be called. What do you want to be called?
I'm glad you asked. I would like to be called the postal manager.
But you said your official title was postmaster.
True, but I believe the term master actually clouds the issue. After all, it refers to a specific gender, not to the job I do. Besides, when we hear master, we tend to get the image of a man in our heads, not the image of a man and a woman, and certainly not the image of just a woman. I suspect postmaster perpetuates the idea that men should be in this position.
Postal manager, that sounds fine with me. I think in the business world, people should be identified by what they do, not who they are. But in general...
What's important is that we allow a person to name him or herself, especially since self-esteem and personal power are involved.
So if I were a woman, it might actually empower me to choose to be called a postal manager or an actor or a waiter or host of a show.
It certainly is important to respect a person's right to name him or herself, whatever the person's gender or race.
Race, too? What does race have to do with gender-biased language?
I think it's important to address the multicultural aspect along with the gender issue.
Why?
I equate most of what you're saying to race, and as a black woman, I see some similarities between racist and sexist comments.
Similarities?
It is a matter of acknowledging the reality that exists, be it the reality of a woman or a man, or the reality of a race or ethnic population that is African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, or Asian, whatever. When you fail to respect the right of self-naming, what you do is begin to devalue with language an individual or a group of people.
Self-naming is really that important?
Yes. Without that right, an individual might feel invisible in the midst of a society. You could be in a social setting and someone might come to you and say, I don't see your color, I don't see your gender, we're all just people.
Shouldn't we all become colorblind as well as gender blind?
In reality, what you'd be doing is not acknowledging a part of my identity. And in doing that, you would be doing me an injustice, and doing yourself an injustice, and doing the general society an injustice.
You know, that's precisely the problem addressed in that wedding scene, the one where the actors argue over man and wife.
That scene's a good example of how one should be able to say, I feel left out, I feel invisible.
As that woman's statement about the inequality of man and wife really made her invisibility apparent.
And her insistence on changing the terminology in the marriage pronouncement was her demand to be visible.
Stand by.
Scene 4, take
Action.
Husband and wife?
No!
Now what?
He still gets to come first. I'd like to come first at least some of the time.
I think she's right. I really don't want that kind of pressure on me all the time.
Okay. Let's try wife and husband, okay?
Wife and husband? That sounds positively ridiculous.
Why? There's nothing natural about husband coming before wife. We've just learned to say it that way.
And we've learned to say it that way because a long time ago, people believed it was the natural order for men to come first and for men to be superior to women.
We'll just have to create a new order for women and men. Well, let's try it. Wife and husband.
Or how about something really equal?
Stand by. Action.
I now pronounce you married.
Gender bias.
Did I really think mankind would work for everybody? There's such a difference. I understand the difference now between calling a female girl and woman. I still don't know if I should call a woman Ms. I wish when that word was invented, all people had taken it as a serious, respectful parallel to Mr. Well, we keep struggling toward equality, don't we? Like with all these other new terms, humans, servers, chair, letter carrier, player-to-player defense, congressional representative, they're starting to sound natural to me. And I notice that I can come up with new terms when I focus on the job or some action, not on whether the person involved is male or female. Like poet, that one's easy, it's already ungendered. But poetess is just a lesser poet. Let's try another one. Ladies and gentlemen, oh no. Members of the audience, what terms will you change?
Wait a minute, what do you mean cameraman? I want to be called a videographer.
But you're a man.
Yeah, but one of the things I've learned from this tape was that my manness has nothing to do with my job. My sex is irrelevant here.
But cameraman is one of the broadcast industry standards. It's generic.
The standards of any industry are never generic if they indicate gender. Thank you.
You're welcome.